Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind podcast episode 86. This week, are we in a property recession? It's going to be an interesting episode where Bob and I unpack our thoughts, educated thoughts. It's a bit of an opinion piece today, but we know you're going to get a lot out of it because we will be stating plenty of facts which will help you on your journey. So let's jump right into episode 86. Welcome to episode 86. As I said, are we in a property recession? Just a bit of a chat with Bob and myself today around what we think's going on. And I want you to, before we even dive into it, I want you to think back to, for those that follow us, think back to during the start of the C word, COVID, or during COVID, and there were plenty of naysayers saying there's going to be a property crash, it's going to be this and that, and you can go back on our Facebook page where Bob stood up and said this will make property go nuts, and he was bang on, so he's probably worth listening to on this one. Anyway, thanks Bob.
Welcome.
It's our podcast now with Bob and Hillary.
Yeah, I've infiltrated your podcast.
Well, I don't know why we started it with just my name.
Oh well, you've got an opinion. You've done plenty of property deals yourself.
Maybe that was it. I don't know.
You're an expert in your own right.
But I invited you as a guest, and then you just stayed.
The guest that stayed.
I know. It's a little bit how the relationship started, I suppose. Just a bit of a guest that stayed on.
Oh, well.
There's a really good story around that. A lot of people know it.
That's a podcast on its own.
It is. It's really about the tenacity of a property developer. Oh. Anyway, Bob. Crikey.
Yeah, property recession, hey? They're hard words.
I know. Recession's such a scary word.
Yeah, it is.
Are we in a property recession?
Yeah, well, I guess, what is a property recession? I mean, we know what an economic recession is, the old technical, 2 quarters of negative growth in a row, but property recession, I've heard the term out there bit.
What defines it?
Well, it's hard to define a property recession as opposed to an economic recession, but I think what it's about is we've seen property values come back, particularly in the later half of 2022 in some areas. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's the recession part. The question is it going to continue? Is it a trend? Are falling values a trend? Has it hit rock bottom? Is it almost hit rock bottom? Have we got a long way to go? I think that's what is meant when people talk about a property recession. And
who even said the word there? Because there are some naysayers out there.
There always are naysayers.
But narcissists, naysayers.
I nearly said Nazis or narcissists,
but we meant naysayers.
Naysayers out there, and look, that's always the way. But there are a few so-called negative things out there that we've been hearing about for a little while.
And I think I think what people are mostly aware of, but we should pinpoint, often naysaying is just clickbait. People are trying to sell you something, or
clickbait.
It's a clickbait
headlines
thing.
On posts or whatever it is.
Yeah, so you're like, what? I want to read it.
Yeah, but we've been seeing values come back, in the second half, as I said, of 2022. In some places, we've seen rising interest rates as well, and we have heard a lot about the R word, the recession. So if you think, inflation. Let me say that again.
The R word, inflation.
The R word, inflation. Property developers aren't very good spellers.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So we've heard about recession, we've heard about rising interest rates. So we haven't just heard about it, we've seen it.
Yeah. And
we've seen some values go back in places. So you could say they're 3 negative things. And so when they're all in the mix together, it's not hard for people who don't really understand how the market works, how the property market works, how economics works, to get a little bit depressed, a little bit scared.
And I think it depends also how and where you see that. If it's given to you as in, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, straight away your brain is going to go to a negative place. But when they're seen in isolation and you see realistically what's happening and what's happened historically, I think the whole thing probably comes out with a different light, which we'll probably allude to pretty soon.
Spot on. As you said, look at them in isolation, even though they're like we lived through all of them.
Yes.
And treat them individually, because they're different drivers, different commodities, and then just see how it's behaved historically, like you said in the past. And at the end of the day, like we look at the fundamentals.
Yes.
Over time, not something that happens out of left field in a very small amount of time. We've got to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture incorporates looking at things over a longer period, particularly things like property.
Well, people have to have somewhere to live.
Good point. Food and shelter are the two basic commodities for life. And shelter, whether you live in one...
You missed shoes, Bob.
And rent, whether you live in it and own it. Oh, shoes.
Yes.
Well, shoes could be, it could be the third commodity to sustain life in your case. But if you think about, people are either owners or renters.
Yes.
But we have to have shelter. And it behaves in certain ways. It follows fundamental rules.
And it is impacted by all of those the things we've talked about.
Yeah, sure.
But it's how it becomes
But not
impacted.
in absolute isolation.
No, and they don't all have the same impact.
No. Interest rates, does that affect property? Very general comment. Answer is yes, but is it the only thing? No. Because what's the rest of the economy like? Nationally, is it a strong economy? What's employment like at the time? If you can have properties that are receding in value when employment could be like 8% and people are worried about their jobs and security, public opinion, that there's a lot of drivers in there, and you can't just jump on the wagon of one and say it's the end of the world. But, back to, is property in a recession? Is it receding? The question is, have properties gone down in value? That's the first thing, and the answer is what?
In some states, yes, and definitely in Sydney and Melbourne, there's been a drop in price, but nationally, it's been about 4.3%, and that's a big national. But you've got to look at the other three states: Perth, Adelaide, and Brisbane have not had
the three biggest.
They have not had a price decrease at all.
No,
they've gone up.
I think in the calendar year 2022, because we got the stats for that, it takes a little while for the statistics to come out. You're right. Sydney went back, I think, a little bit over 9%. Melbourne, I think, was a bit over. Was it
4?
6 or 4?
4.
Just checking.
No,
I did
6.
have a few stats down there. Yeah. So they're our two biggest cities. So if you got Sydney going back like 9, Melbourne going back 6. It's going to impact the national figures.
Then
but it's only
Brisbane
part
up,
of a story.
Brisbane up 3.
Yep.
Perth was close to 7.
Close to 7.
Up. We're talking up here.
Up.
And Adelaide was...
Up a bit over 4.3 or something, I think it was.
4.3.
So, good news there. But the way they work the average, you're right, the average for 2022, I think, was 4.3 minus. So a drop in values of 4.3% for the year nationally. But dragged down, you could say, by, sorry guys, in Sydney and Melbourne, but dragged down by Sydney and Melbourne. And the way they work it out is it's not just the averages of those cities, it's the
amount of properties
in those cities. And so because there's such a large number of properties in Sydney and Melbourne compared to collectively the other cities, the other capitals, it has that added effect.
Yeah, that's what determines that whole drop, 4.3% nationally, when in reality, Perth, Brisbane and Adelaide went up.
Perth's had a good recovery.
Great for Perth.
Yeah. And we didn't mention it, but the others, even Hobart and Darwin, they're all positive. It was only Sydney and Melbourne that were negative during the year. Question is, I guess, when we're talking about recessions, is that going to continue? Is the trend going to continue? In those two cities, or have the others tapped out and they're going to start to go into a bit of a recession? Because
the naysayers.
The namesayers.
Name.
Naysayers. Often they're on a track and they get proven wrong, so they have to quickly pivot in another direction. And so
we talked about this earlier this morning about the momentum and the fact that Sydney and Melbourne had such a big increase so fast. It's almost like a train starting off, leaving a train station, so it starts off slowly and it gathers that momentum. But now it's correcting, it's calming down.
It's a bit harder to slow the train down. So, look, that's typical of markets and property markets, particularly when they've accelerated in a short amount of time, like they did, 2021 or thereabouts. And the big winners, well, everybody was a winner, but the big winners were Sydney and Melbourne. They had the biggest growth.
Yes.
And when a market's sort of rapidly rising, it gets ahead of itself. And so there has to be a correction because nothing can continue at that rapid rate forever. So we all know there's going to be a correction. We're always trying to time it. It's not so much, will there be a correction?
It's
The
when.
question is when and how much.
Yeah.
And so the ones that went up the most, Sydney and Melbourne, were the ones that had the largest correction. And that's all it is. It's like a late 2022 correction to those big markets. And that's really what it is.
Let's open the door to, okay, are we in a property recession? At the moment, Australia-wide, and that's really general, and we're very, very careful about generalising, but the rental market in some areas is very difficult to get into, meaning there is a shortage. But also there has been a massive rent increase in a lot of places, not all, but definitely Brisbane.
It's not over yet.
It's not over.
There's more to come.
There's more to come because we've got migration starting. We've got 200,000 people heading here real soon.
That's going to put a lot of heat on it, but we've had these increases even without that. And it's back to supply and demand. I mean, what drives rental growth? Well, a lot of people that need to rent and not enough houses or apartments or whatever it is they're going to rent. And we still are nationally undersupplied.
Yes.
As you said, we don't like to generalise too much about the whole nation, but generally we are. There might be some spots that have got a bit of oversupply, but nationally we're undersupplied. That puts a lot of pressure on rent, and it forces price growth as well. But as you said, the elephant in the room, and we've been talking about it for a year, it only seems to have come out lately, is that traditionally our price growth is predominantly driven by population increase. And population increase is two components. It's natural increase, which is obviously births minus deaths, and overseas migration. And traditionally, before COVID, overseas migration...
It was just continuous, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, and it supplied 60% of the price growth, which ultimately is the biggest driver of value growth. We didn't have any. We had a boom with no overseas migration. But that's history now, and we've had the correction.
But it makes you think, when we're about to have at least 200 people...
200,000 people.
200,000 people, when we are currently under pressure with housing, it will be...
I've even heard
I don't see that
something like
drop
a
in
million
anything.
applications.
Yes.
I can't confirm that, but I've heard it from a couple of sources. And why wouldn't you? I mean, look how well Australia went during the COVID period, in terms of the way we controlled health compared to a lot of other nations. And so we were the envy of many, many nations. And of course they'd want to come here. And we've got that pent-up demand that we've always used to have a figure something like that in terms of anything for 200, 250,000 coming in from overseas migration just stopped. So you're going to get pent-up demand anyway. Plus Australia being an incredible destination and a proven one for health reasons, it's opened the gates. The government's going to have to somehow control as much as you can. But of course the labour market, that's the thing. It's such a tight labour market that we need.
Yes.
We need the overseas migration in there.
We can walk down the street and 4 coffee shops in a row, or cafe, bar, restaurants, have all got staff wanted.
Yeah. And we're starting to see some wage growth now. And we haven't seen any for a long time.
And that's a
projection.
Inflationary. Yeah, but there is going to be some wage growth. How will that affect migration, Bob? Like, will the migration, because we have that labour shortage.
Yeah, and look, most of them are professionals, so we're not We're not like we're bringing in 200,000 labourers. They're often educated. Just to qualify to immigrate to Australia, there's a lot of boxes to tick.
Not if you're a Kiwi, you just jump on a plane, you're over. So not everyone loves that, but anyway.
Yeah, true. But the other ones. The other immigrants are generally professional people. They're credentialed. They're lots of IT engineers, doctors, and many other types of professional. So and they have money.
Yes.
And initially they probably will rent, which will put more pressure on the rental market. But ultimately they want to buy. And so looking into the future, that is a big driver of the market, both in rental growth as well and. Ultimately, capital growth on property.
And with that rental growth, Bob, it does sort of open that door to people who maybe are considering buying properties as rentals, as investors, or developing as rental investments, or even developers providing rental investments, that lower end market, housing market, starts to increase in price. And generally, it's the upper end, when we're looking at house booms, it's the upper end that does the big stuff first.
Yep.
But this will impact that lower end, won't it?
Yeah. So when values take off, they often take off in the top end first, and then the rest of the markets catch up. On the way down, it's usually the most expensive properties, and we saw that in Sydney and Melbourne first, that start to lose value. But they did go up the most. And all corrections are about that. And often there's very little movement, if anything, on the bottom of the market. You can have a city that could drop 5% in values, and a majority of that 5% could be in the top third of the market. And even the bottom third may have even gone up. So, that's segmenting markets, which you often don't get. Well, you do sometimes get segmented market data. We haven't gone that far in this discussion.
No, and I'm just going to bring it to property developing for a little bit. So when we as developers, that's why it's so important to understand your patch. It's so important to know where you're developing, because that is a segmented market. And if you're... we've only had a few people through the mentoring program that do that very high upper end, and I'm saying very high. Most don't.
No,
and
I like the upper part of the middle of the market. Yeah,
exactly. And you understand where the growth is, or where it's sustaining itself, rather than going to an area that is impacted by a segmented market.
Well, that's the thing about property development, is it's great to look at these stats, and we can look at the national ones, we can look at state stats, we can look at capital city stats. But as developers, we need to go right down to suburban and even sub-suburban. Because you could have a flat market in a city, and some suburbs are going backwards on value, and some are going forwards, and some can go up rapidly. I can remember back around the time of the GFC, 2008, 2009, when our market went fairly flat because we saw what was happening overseas particularly, but then there was a boom on the Bayside suburbs of Melbourne. Like, they went up like 15% in a year, like Brighton and places like that, in the middle of the GFC. And so you're right. As developers, we have to go right down to
segmented markets.
Very segmented, to suburban and even sub-suburban. Because even within a suburb, you can have areas of higher growth. For instance, housing within a school zone of a very popular school, it will have higher growth within the suburb. Part of the suburb might have great views from maybe some hills, some high areas. That's going to have a higher level of growth. Even sub-suburban, which is where we go as a developer. We have to go right down to that. And even down to things like orientation, because even within a street, you can have two identical lots, same size, same zoning, absolutely the same everything. One's on one side of the street and one's on the other. Oh. And even then there can be a price difference in the end value of the product, and therefore in the land value. So
Bob,
quite different.
When we're looking at, so we realise there is a bit of a housing shortage. Been
around for a long time.
And it's possibly going to get a little bit worse, which will increase rents. I'm going to open the door. Can I bring this to developing now a bit more?
Okay.
So if we went to the whole development front, to me that sounds like it's a great time to be in property development. But
yep.
If you know what you're doing, if you know how to crunch the numbers, if you know how to, we say crunch the numbers, but you know how to do your due diligence so it works. You don't just buy a site assuming it's going to be a property development. And we have plenty of cases where people do ring us up. Now, can you help me? But it's too late. You've bought a lemon. Maybe wait 15 years and you'll be okay. But, that's a lot of time wasted with money that could be doing other things. Another thing that is impacting development is construction. How will construction, in your opinion, be... And because we know there's going to be a wage increase, so we might be dealing with wage increase, we might be dealing with construction costs not sort of calming down. What are your thoughts there?
Well, we've seen some large increases in construction costs in the range of 20 to 30%.
Yes.
Previously. A lot of that was, in
Supply.
late 21 into 2022. And that was driven by two factors, really. One was the supply chain, the availability of timber, and a lot of our building supplies come from China. Even things like, full bathrooms and windows, a lot of fit-out product. Timber-wise, there was just a big push on timber, and
Because of the construction boom.
yeah, the construction boom, and that was instigated by the federal government, you could say, particularly in the housing sector.
Oh, that's right, because of the first home buyers. I forgot that
Well,
one.
not
Yeah.
just the first home buyers, but also by the the grant, $25,000 grant, and all the incentives and there were some state incentives on top of the national ones as well, which really kicked the boom off. And the first home owners were a big recipient of that, but just generally the housing market. And that it was a worldwide boom coming out of COVID. It wasn't just Australia. It was worldwide. But anyway, that put a lot of pressure on the supply chain. So we had a lot of stuff coming out of China, out of the factories, and the factories were shut down with COVID. Transport costs became extremely expensive. The cost of a container went up 300%. And so a shortage of materials and a shortage of labour, because there was so much pressure put on labour. So what happens? Labour puts its price up, doesn't it? Bricklayers, carpenters, everybody. If there's a lot of work, you put your pricing up. So we saw labour increases. We also saw an inability to get labour. Builders waiting 6 or 8 weeks for a bricklayer or a plumber or whatever it was.
One development went to lock-up.
Yeah.
One of them.
Went to lock up and
Just
went to sleep
locked
for a
up.
while.
Because they just couldn't get anybody.
Yeah. So there was the supply chain of materials, there was shortages of labour, and increases in labour as well. And that just jacked the prices up. It has improved.
You wouldn't say that we'd come back. You would just say improved.
It'll
as in
probably never
settled
get
down.
back to what it was.
No.
But the availability of materials has improved
Yes,
quite
definitely.
a lot.
Do you think that'll speed up? That did impact the construction time, which impacts interest, and that impacts fees, or impacts the cost of money. So now that we will have a bigger, a faster supply of product, will that improve that?
Well, there's still labour shortages,
Right.
and that's getting better.
Right.
But it's still there, and builders are still going for longer contracts, even though they're often finishing shorter.
What's the reason for that, Bob?
Well, I think by having a longer contract, it also enables them to take on more work. And look, we've seen that in some of the projects we're involved in. For 2 or 3 weeks, you'll get a rush of activity.
Oh my gosh!
And you'll go,
yes.
holy smokes, look how much they've done in 3 weeks. And you sort of think forward and you say, oh, it might be a 10-month contract, but they'll be finished in 5.
They'll be out of here in 3 months.
All of a sudden, next 3 weeks you never see them.
That
Because they're
happens-
having a burst of activity
And then they go
somewhere else, and then they come back.
Bless them.
And so they do have 9 months or 10 or 11 or 12 to do the duplex. It's not that they couldn't build it a lot shorter, but by extending the time, they can take on more jobs.
Yes.
And without the pressure, and with supply getting better and labour getting better, hopefully those timeframes will come back, because they do impact, as you just mentioned, on the feasibilities for a developer, because the longer the build period, the more interest we end up paying. And of all the components within a feasibility for development,
The cost of money.
well, 2 big things have gone up. Build costs have gone up, construction prices, but also interest has gone up.
Yes.
Because of those extended timeframes, and because interest rates are going up. So that puts pressure on projects, on finding projects that are viable
Can I ask
in this new world of higher construction costs and higher interest rates.
I know we're going sort of all over the place here, but so would it make sense to hire a builder and ask them how many jobs they've got on?
Well, you could, but then it still gets back to their access to materials and labour.
And labour, yeah. So how big is
And-
our labour problem when it comes to construction?
Well,
For our sort of developers.
It's still an issue,
Yes.
and that's why builders, I think they're taking longer contracts that could be shorter.
Yes.
They're wanting a 12-month contract when an 8-month contract would be, in my opinion, plenty. Well, I know why it is 12 months, because it used to be 12 months and they maybe used to need 12 months, you know. But that will have to come back a bit. But also, there's a lot of labour. Although a lot of the people that come in for overseas migration are skilled, there's also a lot of skilled construction workers that come in as well. They're not just, you know, people with 2 or 3 degrees.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. Oh, doctors.
Yeah.
Often, and engineers. Yeah.
Yeah, and often they'll have teams themselves, you know.
Right.
I can remember 5-story well, it's not a high rise 5 stories, but the tiler had a gang of Filipino tilers, and boy, could those guys work! You know, they were great tilers, really neat, but really fast, and because they're contractors, they're not on wages, they didn't mind putting in 12-hour days on tiling.
Just smashed it out.
Smashed it out of the park, yeah. So, look, bit of a recap, I guess. Is it in a recession? I see 2023 as a very much a settling year. So I think we're pretty much reached rock bottom. We're very close to it in terms of prices receding in Sydney and Melbourne, which is really the only places generally that they did. I think the other capitals will bounce along. And
just do their general steady growth, nothing major. Just almost go back to a normal style of just
the 3
hold,
to 5%
yeah,
sort of
just
stuff,
doing their
really.
thing, yeah.
And so I think from a price, value decreases, I think it pretty much bottomed out. And then 2023 is the new year, and we're into it now. Inflation is going to take a while to get under control, but it's on its way. I think it's slowly started to head in the right direction. Wage growth is a little bit of the elephant in the room, because we haven't had it for a long time, and that is inflationary.
I wonder what the impact will be there with migration and wage growth, whether that will help calm it down a little bit.
It could calm it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But, some of those drivers of inflation, things like, construction cost increases and all that, the heat's going out of that. We've seen, the price of fuel come back. That's very inflationary, but that's come back. That drove a lot of that initial, 7.5%, 8% inflation. And so some of those things have come out of it. And I think that'll be under control, and it'll slowly recede. I mean, we know that the RBA loves it down around 2 to 3%. It'll be a while before it's that. But I think we'll see it slowly recede. I think property values, will slowly increase in 2023, and I think Sydney and Melbourne have pretty much had their go. And interest rates, well, that's the boogie. I think we've got a little bit to go.
Not much, though. It's about to...
maybe another 25 basis point increases, and I think it'll pretty much tap out. And the point is, I think the RBA is pretty comfortable, because they've got a bit of headroom now. Like, let's say there was another outbreak of some sort of pandemic or something. I mean, down around 1% and less, they've got nowhere to go, and now they've got plenty of headroom. And depending on how the economy runs in the next couple of years, they also have a bit of room to ratchet it back a bit if they need to, if they see it that it requires it. So, and you get used to interest rates. I mean, it'll probably tap out around the 30-year average, somewhere in that sort of 6 and a half, maybe, somewhere around there, probably. The standard variables I'm talking about, not the cash rate. So I think it's a year of settling down, 2023.
So is there a property recession? We're both saying no.
No recession. No
recession.
And we're looking forward to 2023, because back to property development just for a moment, and you might want to close it on that, but you see, property development takes time. It's not instant. Like, if you buy an investment property, you can go out there today and buy one at today's price.
Yes.
Property developers, we create property and we sell it, and generally that's how we make our money, by selling it, but that's not day one.
No.
And so let's say we were to go out there today and buy a site for 3 townhouses. By the time we get our development permit, our building permit, we organise a builder, we get our construction finance sorted out, we then go and build it, and we sell it easily 2 years. And that'll depend where it is. I know some councils that are quite quick, and you might get a quick builder and you might be out in 18 months, but realistically, it's 2 years. And so if you're selling your product in 2 years, you're not selling it today. Now, you might do your feasibility. Of course, you should do it at today's figures. But at the end of the day, what's it going to be like in 2 years when you sell it? I think it's going to be great because I see some just modest price increases in this year and next year. And look, even if
that
it
in
was
your crystal ball, Bob?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, even if it was 4%.
Yeah.
4% this year, 4% next year. We'll just call that 8, even though it's compounded. 8% on a $800,000 property. That makes a bit of difference when you're doing 3. It's an extra couple of $100,000 in your pocket when you get there. Net. Are costs going to go up in the meantime? I see build costs getting pretty close to getting tapped out, really. And there is a fair bit of fat, in building pricing at the moment.
Can the government...
as far as margins go.
Can anyone step in to control that?
Oh, God, no, you don't want that to happen. We don't want government controlling the construction industry.
No.
God knows it's too much. Don't get me on government control. I'm a very free market person. I think... I almost feel like I live in a communist state as it is,
Okay, calm. Off your ball. I shouldn't have opened that can of worms. That's
markets always find their own level if they're not interfered with.
Yeah.
Invariably, we get interfered with.
Yes, and that's when the problems start.
Well, a lot of the boom came off the back of COVID when the government wanted to stimulate the economy and had to, so they picked one particular industry to stimulate, and the whole construction industry, and they picked just one area of it, which is basically house building, because it didn't really work with medium density, longer term development because of the short time frames they put in there. That and the FOMO and everything else that came out, that was the driver.
Actually, Bob, there was one thing we haven't really covered off. The impact of, I know New South Wales has the potential for either no stamp duty or no land tax. What impact?
Oh, that's on the first homeowners thing.
Yeah, will that have much impact?
I only just heard about that. Well, of course, you almost need...
Is it a choice they get, or how does it work?
Look,
I think they get a choice.
I think it might be a choice. I haven't gone into it at the moment. I've only just heard about it a matter of a day or two ago. But because of the high values in Sydney...
medium price, 1.5 mil is medium, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's up around there. It's crazy. Yeah. So in order to assist the first homeowners, I mean, they're having to pay a lot more. Let's say a first homeowner in Sydney pays a lot more than a first homeowner for a comparable house, you might say, in, I don't know, Perth, Adelaide, anywhere.
Brisbane, yeah.
So... some of those incentives need to be there. The state government often fiddles with zero stamp duty. That's been around a lot with a lot of states, because remember, it is a state-by-state thing. But land tax too. Land tax can get very ugly when the values of properties get up. So that can be a good thing. That's probably more of a future thing, because as your values go up, your land tax goes up, whereas your stamp duty only pay it once when you purchase. And so, a bit of a trade-off. One might be the immediate help is probably the stamp duty. The longer-term thing, if you were to look at it and cash flow it over 10 years, it might be stamp duty. But most first-home buyers, let's face it, it's all about now. They're not really looking at that land tax might be a better deal to go with over a 10-year period. They're all about getting into the house now.
And it might be the difference between getting started and not.
Oh yeah. And we've got federal government incentives as well, which are still operating with the 5% deposit.
Yep.
So plenty still there for first homeowners. They did move out of the market a bit. Interest rates, well, I mean, it doesn't help. But we're going to get used to it again. We got so used to low interest rates that, standard variable rates of, 5 or 6% seem really expensive, but but not in my lifetime.
Mine either.
No,
yeah.
Goodness, no. So, people get used to interest rates, and
as humans, we're so adaptable,
inflation will get under control and will peg back, and values will slightly increase, and everyone will be happy again. And mind you, they'll always be out there trying to find a negative story.
Yeah. But anyway, that's our positive story. So we think, get into it if you're a property developer, and if you want to check out what we have available course-wise, jump on our website, propertymastermind.com.au. But before we finish, got to give away a copy of the book, Property Millionaires Exposed. Remember, page 121 is Bob's chapter on property development, but this has quite a few very cool property strategies. If you'd like a copy of this book, you should email me, and I'll put you in the drawer. But this week, the book goes to Sam. Sorry, Sam, your last name is difficult. Confast, I'm going to go with. Anyway, Sam, I will be popping a copy of this in the book to you in the next day or two. And that's about it from us. I hope you found that an interesting topic. Are we in a property
everybody
recession?
has their opinion. I'd like to hear other people's opinions too.
Yeah, feel free to comment, send us an email, subscribe to us on YouTube and tell us what you think. That would be a great idea. And if you find this episode interesting, we would love you to share it with somebody who you think might be interested as well. We'd really appreciate that. All right, that's us. Bye for now.
Bye now.
See ya.